Hello, honeys, and welcome to the final Beesness of July 2025. First things first, a little professional/personal vacation update on my trip to LA. It really was fantastic. I got to do all kinds of things, from going to the Getty Villa to seeing the Neil Diamond musical, A Beautiful Noise, thanks to a friend of mine out there. I also, despite not being a morning person, got up to take surfing lessons one day in Santa Monica, 10 out of 10, beautiful, and saw the Bradbury Building with its super unique wrought iron architecture, and even dropped in a little place called the Last Bookstore, which is one of the coolest gallery, book maze, cafe combos I've ever seen. Although we skipped the Beesness that week, we have a whole slew of new headlines for you today, so let's buckle in and begin. First, a few follow-ups. Our first is that the U.S. Appeals Court has overturned the $8.8 million win for the Bored Ape creator in that trademark case we recently discussed. Yuga Labs, creator of the Bored Ape sensation, submitted a complaint of false advertising, trademark infringement, cybersquatting, and other charges against the defendants in June of 2022 for supposedly ripping off the Bored Ape NFTs. In October of the following year, U.S. District Judge John Walter of Central California ordered artist Ryder Ripps and founder of the NFT marketplace Not Larva Labs / Ripps' partner Jeremy Can to pay $1.38 million to Yuga Labs for, quote, disgorgement and damages, unquote. That amount grew to the $8.8 million total once things like attorney's fees were included. But on July 23rd, the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals said that Yuga Labs had not yet proven that Ripps and Can's tokens, which the former said would confuse buyers of NFTs, were more than, quote, satirical works of appropriation art, end quote. Ripps himself said the copycats are meant to satirize the collection through incorporated elements of the online alt-right, though they personally deny any racism in that act. According to Reuters, however, this case will now go back to federal court in California to determine the validity of Yuga Labs' claims, as proof of that is necessary to, quote, determine whether the fake tokens infringed on Yuga's trademarks, end quote. The last week also saw artists and scholars alike calling for the reinstatement of the Whitney ISP leader who was ousted amid censorship concerns. Over 100 artists and scholars signed the open letter, quote unquote, in defense of former associate director of the Whitney Museum of American Arts' independent study program, Dr. Sarah Nadal-Melzio, whose position, as we covered, was eliminated back in June following the cancellation of a pro-Palestine performance scheduled by ISP cohort members and subsequent suspending of the entire ISP program. The letter reads in part, quote, as much as to protest this unjust firing, we write to demand the reopening of the ISP, end quote. Art News writes that the signatories, quote, also reiterated a request from the Artists at Risk Connection for the artists to, quote, convene an independent investigation into the termination of the ISP's associate director and its implications for academic and artistic freedoms at the museum, end all quotes. We are still waiting for the Whitney to comment. Last week also saw a French nonprofit filing a case against Russia in international criminal court over, quote unquote, systemic and organized plundering of Ukrainian culture. The nonprofit itself is called For Ukraine for Their Freedom and Ours, and it filed on July 11th, calling for arrest warrants to be issued for the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, and 8 other high-ranking Russian officials under claims that the mass plundering since 2022 was, quote, planned at the highest level of the Russian state, end quote. Christian Castagna, the nonprofit's advocacy manager, told Art News that their lawyers were, quote, confident in how the prosecutor's office will handle the information, end quote, submitted to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, especially as a previous 2023 campaign by the organization to get the ICC to issue 2 arrest warrants for Putin over the illegal wartime deportation of Ukrainian children was somewhat successful. But the reason for our attention on this story, honeys, is the follow-through. This is the same group who said it would take the International Council of Museums, or ICOM, to court in France, ICOM's headquarters, if it failed to remove Russia in an open letter published in the French publication Le Monde in early May. We respect that they are standing 10 toes down on business. And France's Pompidou Metz announced on Friday that a tourist ate Maurizio Cattelan's famous duct-tape banana once again while it was on display at the museum as one of 400 plus objects in a 15th anniversary celebration show of the Pompidou Outpost post. The phrasing of this article, honeys, made me laugh time and again because they said things like, quote, security staff rapidly and calmly intervened, end quote, and that the reinstalled artwork was completed, quote, within minutes, end quote. Well, of course it would be. So the years in which the infamous banana has now been eaten are its debut year at Art Basel Miami 2019, 2023 in Seoul, and of course 2025. But what's the best part of this story, I think, is that nobody seems to be mad about it. The museum seemed to write this off as just a minor incident, seeming unbothered. It told AFP that as the, quote, fruit is perishable, it is regularly replaced according to instructions from the artist, end quote, seeming to mentally add anyways to the end of that statement. And the artist himself told AFP that he was disappointed the person didn't also eat the skin of the banana as well as the gray duct tape holding it to the wall. He said the banana eater had, quote, confused the fruit for the work of art, end quote. And our final follow-up, Icelandic artist Oddur Einstein Fjöriksen, known as Odie, had been trying to retain ownership of a conceptual artwork in the form of a fake UK-registered website copy titled We Are Sorry and mimicking that of Iceland's largest fishing company, Samherji, but last week the UK courts rejected his final appeal to do so. The artist made the parody website in order to call attention to the fishing company and quote-unquote apologize on its behalf for the so-called fish rot scandal, which we covered in a previous Beesness. As for the fish rot corruption case itself, the prosecutor has yet to make any decisions about bringing charges forth, but this news follows that of last November, when another judge in the UK ruled in favor of Samherji after it sued Odie for creating the apologetic website in the first place. In the most recent ruling, Judge Anthony Mann accepted that the artist had not sought to make commercial gain from the digital artwork, but ruled that Odie could not count on the protection of Article 10 of the Human Rights Act regarding freedom of expression, as the website was not a parody in his opinion, but had, quote, been an instrument of fraud, end quote. Samherji itself did not comment to our sources, but Odie told Art News that, quote, if this ruling were allowed to stand, then artworks by Andy Warhol, Banksy, and others would likewise be deemed illegal. It's essential that this case proceeds to Strasbourg, where it can have the greatest impact. With my lawyers, I have already begun preparations to take the case to the European Court of Human Rights. Contemporary artists must be able to express themselves on matters of public concern, end quote. So obviously, this is not the last we will be hearing on that story. Moving on to some brand new headlines from last week. The first, Amy Sherald has canceled her Smithsonian exhibition over censorship concerns. Sherald became a household name in 2018 with her portrait of Michelle Obama. She told the New York Times that she rescinded her upcoming show, titled American Sublime, after learning the museum was considering removing her portrait of a transgender Statue of Liberty, titled Transforming Liberty from 2024, in line with President Donald Trump's anti-trans mandates. She wrote to Smithsonian Secretary Lonnie Bunch on July 23rd, quote, I entered into this collaboration in good faith, believing that the institution shared a commitment to presenting work that reflects the full, complex truth of American life. Unfortunately, it has become clear that the conditions no longer exist to support the integrity of the work as conceived, end quote. Sherald further explained that Bunch proposed a compromise in the form of a video of audience reactions to the artwork, but Sherald saw danger in, quote, opening up for debate the value of trans visibility, and I was opposed to that being part of the American Sublime narrative, end quote. A Smithsonian spokesperson said the institution supports her efforts to protect the integrity of her work, but, quote, could not come to an agreement with the artist, end quote. The headline is so noteworthy because American Sublime, which is currently on view at the Whitney, was slated to travel to and thus become the first solo show of a Black contemporary artist at the National Portrait Gallery in September, but also bigger picture reasons. Art News reminds us, quote, the Smithsonian Institution's exhibitions are currently under review by the White House, which claims its shows have skewed too far from the greatness of our nation or the millions of Americans who have contributed to its progress, end quote, despite Smithsonian affirmations of its independence. With news like this, we are left to wonder a little bit what that independence looks like these days. We also heard that France's culture minister will stand trial for alleged abuses of power and corruption. The AFP reported on Tuesday that Rachida Dati, a 59-year-old and a mayoral candidate for 2026, will face the trial for accusations of abuses of power and corruptions that occurred while she was a member of the European Parliament, or an MEP. The charges were brought in 2019, and she's denied them all. She will have to prove that she did not take 900,000 euros or 1 million US dollars in lawyers' fees between 2010 and 2012 from a Holland-based subsidiary of Renault Nissan while not actually working for it. Those years overlapped with her MEP years years, which lasted from 2009 to 2019. Our sources say that French authorities have reportedly also ordered Carlos Ghosn, the company's 71-year-old former boss, to be tried, but he escaped to Lebanon from Japan by hiding in a large smuggled box on a private jet. He was, as you might imagine, subsequently dismissed unanimously by Nissan's board. Lobbying for car companies in the European Parliament is a banned activity, so not only could this land her with fines, possibly jail time, but it will definitely affect her results in the race in some way. We're curious to see how. Last week also saw the eruption of mixed feelings in the art world after Spain's Supreme Court ruled that a set of 13th century Romanesque murals removed from the Siena Monastery in Aragon during the Spanish Civil War and housed since in the National Art Museum of Catalonia must be returned to their original home. The latest ruling finds that the Catalonian government's claims of legitimate ownership are invalidated by the fact that the original owners, the Siena religious order, never formally ceded or transferred ownership. This decision is important because it settles hundreds of years of jurisdiction and ownership debate, but it also hinges on a question of practicality in the execution. El País writes that the decision is being hailed as a victory by the Aragonese government, but Art News writes that experts warn it could come at a steep cultural cost, pointing to the fact that the National Museum has filed a document requiring further study of the fragility of the works, which are currently stretcher-mounted and climate-controlled, considered fragile even by conservationist standards. This document suggests instead a phased approach to returning the works, starting with less delicate ones, and reads in part, quote, "A comprehensive view of the conservation project requires taking into account that the stages of diagnosis, risk assessment and management, preparation of the work, dismantling, packaging, and transport are related to the subsequent installation at the destination," end quote. And they are right. When you're transferring artwork, you have to be super secure and safe about it, conservationist about it, every single step of the way. So we will see, as it literally plays out, what this timeline becomes. The Fine Arts Museums of San Francisco, which include the De Young Museum and the Legion of Honor, announced the layoff of 12 staffers, or about 5% of its workforce, in a July 18th press release reproduced in the San Francisco Chronicle last week. The institution cited a decline in tourism and a need to close a budget gap in doing so, saying, quote, "The difficult decision came after months of planning and internal cost-saving measures and reflects the broader challenges arts institutions and many organizations across the Bay Area and beyond have faced," end quote. The news seems extra grim as it comes just 2 months after the announcement that the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art would eliminate 29 roles and allow 13 more to go unfulfilled, as it too sought to deal with a decline in tourism and a loss of income from that. We covered that headline at the time as well and have equally mixed feelings about it. Last week also brought us the headline that despite her legal claim to its ownership, a woman has decided to return an artwork that was stolen more than 50 years ago. The who here is a Norfolk, England woman named Barbara Didoza, widow of Baron Didoza, who supposedly bought it in good faith after the robbery and was allowed to keep it because of the UK's Limitations Act of 1890, which legalizes ownership of stolen goods after 6 years if the purchase was not connected to the theft. The artwork in question is Madonna and Child by the Italian artist Antonio Solario, aka Lo Zingaro. It disappeared from Italy's Civic Museum of Belluno in 1973 as part of a major heist and has been on the most wanted lists of many police departments since. The widow Didoza has now agreed to return the artwork, quote, "after years of soul-searching and persuading by an art lawyer," end quote, who has his own roots in the Italian region, we might note. It may also have something to do with his advice to her that even though the act supports her owning it, because of its presence on those lists, the databases like that of Interpol and the Carabinieri, it could never sell, exhibit, or be transported, and thus she is giving it back. However, we may have future updates on this one, honeys, as other works from the heist are still missing to this day. We also learned that Joanna Burton will be the next to lead Philadelphia's Institute of Contemporary Art. She has served as an executive director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles since 2021 and will take up her new role on November 1st. Hyperallergic also reported on 2025's visa denials and their hurdles, their effects on artist residencies. It took the highly competitive month-long Art OMI residency program in upstate New York this year as its sort of case study, finding that some of the 24 artists slated to participate in it must stay back due to ongoing challenges expected to worsen under Trump, those like closed embassies or denied documents. These fears were specifically echoed by Jess Maxwell, Art OMI's communications director. To to our sources. This is concerning to us, honeys, because these embassy/consulate closures, travel bans, may indefinitely bar certain international artists from participating in not only Art-Omi, but other US-based residencies, which could be crucial for their career building, for their creative growth. Some of this is due to broader politics, but it's unfortunate that it's affecting individuals. Take, for example, Sui, a Chinese artist from the mountainous Siberian Republic of Buryatia, who said she's had a particularly tough time applying for visas in the last 2 years. There's also strong danger for racism here. The majority of those on the denied list were from Rwanda, Nigeria, Haiti. Ruth Adams, Art-Omi's co-executive director, told Hyperallergic that it isn't unusual for a person from a Muslim-majority nation to be denied visas to the US, but it should be noted that all of these artists, even including Sui, come from global minority nations, and they are having more difficulty than others. The sort of silver lining to this report was how Art-Omi is accommodating these artists via alternative online options, non-US based residencies, and allowing participants to hold off for next year. Last week also saw Ronald Perlman's $410 million art insurance trial open with a question of oomph. After 7 years and more than 1,500 court filings, the billionaire collector's legal standoff with his Lloyd's of London insurers over fire damage to artworks by the likes of Ed Ruscha, Andy Warhol, and others has finally reached a courtroom. Perlman claims that the artworks were located at his East Hampton estate at the time of a fire which exposed them to smoke and sprinklers, and that stripped them of their market appeal, or what Perlman described in filings as their quote-unquote oomph. But Lloyd's of London claims that these works were not damaged in any detectable way and offered some proof with the fact that Perlman tried to quickly sell some afterwards. Perlman's team countered that argument by saying that invisible chemical degradation, even if not tangible now, would reduce the lifespan of the artwork, but this is a nearly impossible argument to appraise. What's fascinating about this case and why it's worth our attention is that it centers so much on perception. What is the perceived measure of loss for each side? The battle really starts and ends there, honeys. Furthermore, just because it reached the courtroom does not mean it's anywhere near finished. Because appraisals are done at a specific time and markets change over time, a big case like this that goes on for years might involve requests for updated appraisals over the years. That, of course, adds to the length of the process and makes the courts look more like trading floors, says Arts News. In other words, we don't have any idea how long this battle will last or what its outcome will be. And we would be remiss to have a Beesness this week without mentioning that Ozzy Osbourne, Black Sabbath singer and godfather of heavy metal in the opinion of many, passed away at 76 just weeks after his farewell show. He will be missed. But we have a second obituary for Raymond Saunders, who passed at age 90. Casemore, Andrew Krebs, and David Zwirner galleries, all of which co-represent the artist, announced his passing in a joint statement on Instagram on Monday of last week. Art News writes of him, quote, Saunders wove complex narratives through elusive means, and in so doing, often prodded the very fabric of what it means to be an educated Black American man, end quote. 2 years after Venetian officials announced restoration plans and sparked debate over the artist's intentions with them, a Banksy mural was removed from the Palazzo San Pantalone wall in Venice on Wednesday. Titled Migrant Child and depicting a child in a life jacket holding a pink smoke flare, it appeared without notice on the Palazzo during the 2019 Venice Biennale and started to deteriorate with the salt and water exposure by 2023. Though it doesn't qualify for state protections as it isn't over 70 years old, the Venetian regional governments have taken a special interest in restoring and preserving the viral artwork. There are multiple reasons to care about this story, to pay attention to what's going on here. The plan itself is drawing criticism because in many artist, activists, and even some historian and critic eyes, quote, Banksy was fully aware that his waterside creation wasn't meant to endure. Restoring it goes against the grain, end quote. That quote itself is attributed to a street artist by the name of Everrain. The sense of a commercial takeover is very strong here to me. It seems that they are more interested in getting in on the profit margin and Banksy hype than the significance of the art itself. Art News confirms the project was financed by Banca Ifis, a Venice-based bank that promotes art and culture. The bank said it consulted with people close to Banksy, but did not confirm direct permission with the artist, quote, even though the bank plans to display the work at free cultural events after restoration, though no date or cost has been made public, end quote. And even more directly, we have the following quote from Culture Ministry Undersecretary Vittorio Sgarbi, who took credit for securing the funding in 2023 and stated at the time, "We are not interested in whether the author is alive nor whether he gives us consent. It is my job to protect contemporary art," end quote. Ultimately, what's concerning is that it seems like this was a decision made quote-unquote for the many by the few. And as activist Rosanna Carrieri, who works with the Cultural Heritage Association, Mi Rokonoski, told Euronews, it is, quote, imperative to consult both the artist and the local community, otherwise it risks becoming a top-down endeavor capitalizing on Banksy's fame, end quote. Good news for fans of galaxies far, far away. Darth Vader's lightsaber from the original Star Wars trilogy is heading to auction for the first time ever. The iconic prop will be sold in September alongside other pieces of movie memorabilia and is expected to fetch up to $3 million US. Also featured in the sale will be a neuralizer from the Men in Black franchise and the helmet worn by Sauron in the Fellowship of the Ring. Artforum also reported last week that the Art Dealers Association of America has decided not to run this year's iteration of its flagship fair, in a first since the 1988 founding of it. The show would have opened at Park Avenue Armory in the fall and in support of a social services nonprofit on New York's Lower East Side, the Henry Street Settlement, which it has raised more than $38 million US for in the past nearly 30 years. The organization's board said in an email to ADAA members that they decided upon a quote-unquote strategic pause coming after a quote-unquote careful review that would, quote, present a meaningful opportunity to reimagine the art show with long-term sustainability and member value in mind, end quote. They confirmed the fair will return next year. Although it is entirely possible they truly are looking to refresh, reset, and come back with something new, I can't help but wonder how much of the decision relates to the implementation of tariffs and the effects of those that we've seen on the art market in our other businesses this year. Whether or not they come back next year will tell us either way, I think. And our final story for the week, Senator John Fetterman proposed a bill last week to apply anti-money laundering protections to the U.S. art market. On July 23rd, he and several other U.S. senators proposed the new legislation titled the Art Market Integrity Act, which would apply the protections to a wide number of professionals in the U.S. art market. More specifically, art advisors, consultants, custodians, galleries, museums, collectors, or, quote, any other person who engages as a business as an intermediary in the sale of works of art, end quote. If passed, it would also amend the Bank Secrecy Act to require all of them to comply with anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing regulations under the authority of the U.S. Treasury. As for what exactly this new legislation applies to, it seems a little arbitrary, a little inconsistent, but for that reason, it's not as scary, maybe, as the new European Union rules. The text of this bill specifies that works of art include, quote, any original painting, sculpture, watercolor, print, drawing, photograph, installation art, or video art, end quote, but doesn't include what it considers applied arts, like, quote, product design, fashion design, architectural design, interior design, or mass-produced decorative art, including ceramics, textiles, or carpets, end quotes. We have not heard any specifics at all on furniture or antiques. It also has some exemptions that are pretty important. Art sellers who do not have single transactions over $10,000 and do not total transactions of $50,000 involving a work of art are free from this legislation, as are artists who sell their own works and nonprofit organizations. This bill saw a fairly even split of originators across the aisle. 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans made up its proposition group. Also notable, the bill has received endorsements from many, including the Antiquities Coalition, Transparency International US, the American Jewish Committee, Razum for Ukraine, the Initiative for the Recovery of Venezuelan Assets, the National Border Patrol Council, and the Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association. Whether or not it will be effective is, however, still a question. Professor of Art Crime at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Aaron Thompson, told our sources, quote, regulation of the opaque art market is desperately needed, but given the success major players have had so far in fighting every attempt to restrict their profits, I have little hope this bill will succeed, end quote. And that is our show for the day, honeys. I hope you enjoyed your week off as much as I enjoyed my vacation. Glad to get back down to the grind with you all. And on that note, remember to, as you are grinding away, stay hydrated, do not dehydrate, take care of yourselves in this summer heat, and we'll talk soon. This podcast is produced, created, hosted, formerly edited, and fact-checked by master's degree holder Celia Bugno. Chris Meinhold is responsible for our editing, mixing, and our intro and outro music. Special thanks to him for that. And as always, remember to like, subscribe, share, comment, so on all your favorite listening as well as social media channels.